When I was younger, there was a ruined building at the end of our street. Every kid in the area kept well away from it because of a rumor that it was haunted. The concrete walls of the old two-storied building were cracked and crumbling. The windows were broken and shards of glass lay all over the floor inside. One evening, as a test of courage, my best friend and I decided to explore the creepy old place. We climbed in through a window at the back of the building. The whole place was dirty and there was mud on the wooden floor. As we dusted ourselves off, we looked up and were shocked to see that someone had written the words, "I am dead," on the wall near the ceiling. "Probably just some teenagers trying to scare kids," I said. "Yeah, probably," replied my friend nervously. We explored more of the rooms on the ground floor. In a room that looked like a kitchen, we found more writing on the wall. It read, "I am in a room upstairs." We walked up the creaking stairs to the second floor. I led the way and my friend followed close behind. I wasn't scared, but he was beginning to get a little jittery. When we came to the top of the stairs, we turned left and walked cautiously down the hallway. At the end there was a closed door with some more ominous writing on it. "You will find me in this room." By now, my friend was shaking. I was creeped out too, but I didn't show it. He told me he didn't want to go any further, but I insisted, assuring there was nothing to be afraid of. I turned the handle and the door creaked open. We stepped into the room and found it empty. There were two closed doors on either side. There was more creepy writing on the wall. It read, "My head is on the left and my body is on the right." As soon as my friend saw this, he completely lost it. He gave a yelp and turned to run away. I held his arm, but he shook me off and fled out through the open door. I heard his footsteps disappearing down the hallway. I held my ground. I was determined to overcome my fear. Mustering all my courage, I opened the door on the right and walked inside. I walked to the other side of the room and on the wall, written in tiny letters, were the words, "My body is underneath." I looked down at the floor. I was standing on some more writing on the floorboards. I stepped back and saw the words, "My head is coming from the room behind you." I heard the door behind me creaking and quickly turned. There was a shadow behind the door. Suddenly something rolled into the room and rested against the wall. It was my friend's. His dead, sightless eyes seemed to stare at me. Screaming in horror, I flung myself out through the open window and fell 2 stories to the ground. I landed on my side, breaking my arm. In horrible pain, I ran home crying and yelling. The police were called and they searched the old ruined building. At first, they didn't find anything. There wasn't even any writing on the wall. They combed the house from top to bottom, but didn't find any traces of my friend. Then they pried up the floorboards. His body was lying underneath. They never found his head. One day, there was a new kid in my class. Nobody knew who he was. He didn't have any friends and never talked to anyone. He was always just laying with his head down on his desk, looking depressed. I wondered if there was something the matter with him. "What's wrong?" I asked one day when we were alone. "Did something bad happen to you?" When he heard my question, his hands started shaking. He let out a long, deep sigh, steadied himself, and slowly, he began to talk. He said that 1 month ago, something had happened that really disturbed him. He was sitting in his room playing games on his computer when he happened to glance up at his ceiling. He noticed that the board covering the entrance to the attic was out of place. He wanted to investigate, so he grabbed a flashlight, stood on his chair, and climbed up into the attic. When he got up there, he was surprised by how large the attic was. He shone the flashlight around, but he couldn't see any of the walls or the roof. It seemed as if the darkness stretched on forever. He began walking forwards, searching for whatever could have moved the board. All of a sudden, the batteries in his flashlight ran out and he was plunged into darkness. He was scared. The darkness seemed to surround him, encroaching on all sides. He began searching for the way out. He wanted to go back down to his bedroom, but no matter what direction he walked in, he couldn't find the opening. There was no light at all leaking in. It was pitch dark. He was lost and alone in his own attic. He continued wandering around in the dark, searching for a way out, but he couldn't see where he was going and became disoriented. He had no idea where he had come from and didn't know which direction he was going. He began to panic and continued walking. Walking. He didn't know how long he had been walking, but he finally saw the faint glow of light in the distance. He started walking faster. He was sure that it must be the light from his room, but as he got closer and closer, he realized that it couldn't be the light from his bedroom. He got close enough to make out where the light was coming from. It was a city in the distance. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. It just didn't make sense. There was an entire city in his attic, and the lights could be seen from quite a distance. It seemed impossible. He didn't know what else to do. He didn't know where else to go. He began walking towards the city, hoping somehow that he could find his way home. At this point in the story, he began shaking again. He let out a pained sigh and tears rolled down his cheeks. I was puzzled by his story, so I tried to console him as best I could. "You're okay now," I said, patting him on the shoulder. "It was scary, but you're back now." He looked up at me, tears still running down his face. He slowly shook his head and said, "You don't understand. I still haven't found a way out of the city." One night, a man had a nightmare. It was the scariest thing he ever experienced. In the dream, he found himself walking in a desert. Somehow he had no idea how he got there, but he knew he was lost. When he looked down, he realized he was carrying a machete. The long steel blade looked razor sharp. The sun was beating down, and the heat was intense. The man was sweating madly, but he kept walking. After some time, he saw a dark figure crouching down in the distance. As he approached, he saw that it was a person lying in the sand. He was feeling extremely lonely, so he was grateful to see another person. He quickly ran up to the man and bent over to help him up. However, when he turned the man over, he took one look at his face and recoiled in horror. He was looking at himself. In that instant, he was so overcome with fear that he raised the machete above his head and, without thinking, hacked the man to death. Horrified by what he had just done, he dropped the weapon and started running through the desert, trying to get as far away as possible. With every step, his feet sank further into the sand, but he kept on going. Eventually, he stumbled and fell to the ground. Lying in the sand, he realized that he had sprained his ankle. Nothing he could do. After a while, he looked up and saw the figure of a man approaching across the wide desert. As he approached, he waited until he could see his face clearly. To his horror, he realized it was himself, and in his hand, he was carrying a razor-sharp machete. It wasn't a nightmare. It was an endless loop.